Okay, so this is just going to be a quick demo of my 3D solar system simulation that I've written using C++ and OpenGL 4. There's a couple other libraries that I'm using that I'll get to. So the first obvious one is I'm just using a very simple GLFW window here, and that's how I'm handling any mouse and keyboard input. So starting with the planets, you can see they've all got a nice texture on them. They're all also relatively drawn to scale, so these four are all to scale, along with Pluto. And then these four are to scale, meaning that relative to each other, all of these sizes are correct, but they should be a lot bigger than this. The reason they're not is twofold. The first is that you can see with Saturn, we're doing an instance render here for its rocks in order to create the ring. So if I chose to make Saturn bigger, then I'd have to draw a lot more of these rocks, and that would hurt my computer quite a bit. So I chose not to do that. And the second reason is that I actually did try making them correctly to scale, and I didn't really like it because I felt that the size of these four very heavily overpowered the size of these, and it kind of just threw it off a little bit. So I just chose not to. So for model loading, you can see we have, like I said before, we have the rocks here for Saturn's rings, and then we also have a bunch of rocks around here. This is just the asteroid belt that lies between Mars and Jupiter. And I'm just loading these rocks using ASIMP or however you pronounce it. Just using that model loading utility to import their vertices and indices. The code for it is relatively straightforward. And then for lighting, you can see we have the sun here at the center, acting as a nice big glowy ball. And then all the planets here. We're just doing a very basic ambient and diffuse lighting, and that's for the rocks as well. And it should be pretty clear as to why. In the case of the rocks, they're so far away that it doesn't really make sense for there to be a specular highlight on them anywhere. But then in the case of the planets, it should be really clear as to why, but in case it's not. The planets aren't just a very little shiny metal ball with a nice texture wrapped around them floating in space. No, they have a much more complicated terrain and surface than what you see. And so as a result of that, yeah, you're not going to get a specular highlight anywhere on any of these. So I just omitted it completely in all of the shaders. It's just a very basic ambient and diffuse lighting model. So, and then of course we also have a cube map wrapping the scene of just black background and some stars. So I'll start messing around with the windows that we have here, just written using ImGUI. So I can turn up the rotation speed, and all of these speeds are correct relative to each other. So you can see Jupiter spinning like crazy, meanwhile Venus is hardly moving at all. I'll turn up the rotation, the orbital speed just a little bit. I'll hit play, and you can see they're all orbiting now. And again, these orbital speeds are also relative to each other. So you can see we have Neptune at the end, and Pluto hardly moving at all. Meanwhile, Mercury is in the middle going crazy. And then we also have a planet render option here, so I can toggle which planets I want to render onto the screen. So there went Jupiter and a couple others. There goes Saturn. And then the nice thing about this is that because of the way that I'm calculating their position, if I turn off Jupiter, I want it right here. Then if I turn it back on, it should come over about there. Oh, over here. So this is just a byproduct of the way that I'm calculating their position. It makes it so that the calculation of their position is completely independent of whether or not they're actually being drawn to the screen. And if you look at the code, it should make sense as to how that's working. And then we've got a couple more windows here. We've got performance. This is just measuring the frame time in milliseconds and the FPS. So 16 ms and 60 FPS, so that's pretty good. And then this little camera option here. So this will affect the speed. So right now I'm moving kind of slow, but then if I turn it up, moving a lot faster. And then the same thing for mouse sensitivity. If I turn it down, mouse is hardly moving at all. And then if I turn it up, it's a lot faster. So I'll have a link in the description to the GitHub repo if you want to take a look at the code. It'll have all the .h files, all the CPP files, the shaders as well. So that'll all be down there if you want to take a look. And yeah, thanks for watching.